So wanting to take a look at accessory work, and I think that really does go hand in hand with overall volume. And, I think there's a really good way to go about it. And I think there's more of, not so smart ways to go about adding accessories and just adding volume, so to say. So I think the article I found, which is actually part of the study material for level 3, I think it goes really good hand in hand with the other little piece I found from Misfit, and that was just talking about how they structure accessory work. I did some research, like trying to find if anybody had like written articles on it, and I really couldn't find anything. So I felt like this was the best piece to share with you guys on that. Let's start with the James Hobart article, and we'll talk about that one, and we'll talk about like the volume, and then we'll let that just bleed right into what Misfit has, because I think what they have written out actually was really really good in hand with what like James Hobart is saying in the article as well. So whether you guys got to that article or not, I think the biggest takeaway by far from the James Hobart one, and like if you're prepping for level 3 or just wanting to really do a good job in CrossFit, make the most of it, or coach to the best ability, is intensity is always going to trump volume. So I think overall, if you take nothing away from today, the intensity piece is going to be more important than stacking things on top of each other. Did you guys come out with that same takeaway or same thought? You guys ever able to look at it?
Yeah.
With that thought, obviously adding more is not necessarily going to be better unless what you're adding, is done really well, and depending on why you're adding it, I think is a really big factor. He mentions doing a 60-minute class at 90% effort is going to provide more bang for your buck and more fitness than doing a 90-minute session at 60% effort. And that statement, when you look at, Mayhem or Proven or some of these training compete programs, you notice that a lot of the stuff is gauged in percentages and RPEs and things like that. Like that's all written out like that, one, because they're probably doing some kind of linear progression on whatever cycle you're in, but then also that's how they're managing the intensity with the number of pieces that they're giving the athletes as well. So, if you're doing a 5x3 clean and those cleans are set at 60%, like they mean 60%, because the other stuff you have to do that day is going to, stack up on itself. Versus if you did that 5x3 cleans and you were taking a class and that was the only thing you were going to do that day, and you do all 5 sets pretty much like a 90%, intensity get up, like you're smoked after it. Like you're pretty much going to be tired. You're not going to put a lot of energy into anything you're doing after that. So taking that into consideration, I think, is something to really think about, and that's important. And then one of the other points he had that I thought was huge was when he talked about adding volume, looking back on, is this person mechanically moving extremely well already? I thought that was like one of the most important things he said in this article. And it just made me go back to even like sports. Like if I'm playing baseball and I'm in the batting cage hitting and I have a terrible swing that's not mechanically sound, all I'm doing is making my swing worse. I'm reinforcing the bad habits and the bad movement functions. Versus like taking a step back and hitting off of a tee, fixing that first. It's not a fun thing to do, no matter what sport you're in. But if you look at specifically like CrossFit and weight training, if we've got bad movement habits, one, we talked about being efficient, right? You're just wasting and killing all this energy for no reason. You don't have to be. But then when we look at like the long-term effect, we have poor mechanics, we're probably trending towards something happening that's going to totally sidetrack like an injury. It's like having a misaligned tire on the car, right? The tire's not going to blow up going to the supermarket. The tire's going to blow up the more miles I put on the road, or if I go on that like longer road trip. It's going to be an overtime effect. So when we stack more work on top of bad habits, I think we also increase like that injury chance as well. Questions or statements on that before I keep running through?
Um, uh, the question I have with this particular one would be, or with like the poor mechanics thing, would be like, I know oftentimes accessory work, when I'm thinking of it, I think of like some sort of lifting piece, but can this accessory work also be applied to like a skill piece
Oh,
where
for
someone
sure.
that's working on the mechanics as opposed to doing some sort of like hamstring curl or something?
I think definitely. And I think those pieces, like you don't always have to think of like, okay, we're gonna do, you know, heavy squats or Olympic lift, and then our accessory work's gonna follow. Like we can view our accessory work as something that we do before that stuff. So maybe it is a skill session, that's going to lead the person into an Olympic lifting session, or maybe it's some kind of gymnastic skill before they get to the workout. Yeah, view Misfit had this at the bottom of the thing. They were like, don't overthink it and like let yourself be creative. Like be creative. So it doesn't have to just be, we're lifting, we're working hard, we're putting blood, sweat, and tears into it. It can be a purely neurological practice session too. I think that's also a really good way to get a lot of valuable work done without continuing to add like the volume that's going to beat our body up too, you know? Because usually practice skill stuff it's not extremely physically taxing because you are, going slower thinking about what you're doing. That being said too, I think when you do add in those other things, even if it is just raw weightlifting, being very mindful of what you're doing and how you're moving can be a really important piece as well. It's part of the reason why I love tempos. It makes people slow down. Usually bad movements can't happen as easy when they do stuff like that.
How do you feel about because I read Matt Fraser's Hard Work Pays Off book, and his thing is to like practice under fatigue and work under fatigue, and that's gonna make you better. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it depends. I think like if you're looking at it from the point of view like it's Matt Fraser, like we've seen him in the highest level of competition, and his mechanics don't break down to the point where you're like, oh, like if they break down, they're going to be very, very minimal. So if you have an athlete that I think is, I don't even want to say advanced, but just more aware of like what they're doing, then I think working under fatigue can be a really good thing. Because like a CrossFit workout, there no matter what workout you do, there's a point in time where you were working under fatigue and you're not fresh. If you were going to combine like what Justin was saying, and like that question, I think it depends like what it is, how good at it are you, and like what stage are you in. So if it's something like, you know, we use double unders because that's one that people just practice all the time. Like if someone doesn't have dubs yet, then putting another element or working fatigue with those isn't going to help, right? It's just going to be much harder for them to grasp it versus if, let's say, they've worked on dubs, they've had this stage where they've solely practiced it. Now they're getting sets in and they're stringing, and now it's becoming more of like they've got the skill of a double under, but now it's a problem when you pair it with burpees because they feel their arms burn. Then doing it under fatigue like that could be a good idea. So I think it just depends what it is and like what the intent and goal is. Like for a competitor, I think working under fatigue is going to be a majorly important thing because you're also doing multiple events a day, and that's why even though we're talking against putting a ton of volume in, it's still going to be needed at some point in time based on the goals. But if it's going to be like someone that's not moving mechanically as well, and they're working under fatigue on like a snatch, and they're going to start to be working for, then I would say no. So I would say it's definitely a case by case basis, depending on what it is. But definitely, I think there is value there for sure. I'm a great example of that. You give me one movement and you say, let's do a mom, I'm fine. I look great on it. Might be a little tired versus you take a second element and you plug in a second element to it, it's a whole different case. Like you see a different athlete come out of me than that first one. And that's like where I need to be. I need to be introducing those second elements type things. or under more fatigue. The second element being the more fatigue factor. Did I answer that pretty good? I didn't mind listening faces. Long-term wise, when you talk about like adding a bunch of volume into it, we definitely have to look at like, when are we doing that? Where are we doing that? Recovery is going to become a major piece. Like we have to focus more on recovery. And most of the time, I think when we're putting in just a ton of volume and it's starting to become like a 2-a-day scenario, it's not going to be a something thing for, right? Hobart brought that up in his article. He talked about, when they're getting close to the games, they're starting to do these 2-a-days and 3-a-days, not every day even. And then once the games are done, he's like, next couple months, I just take classes, get back. Like everything drops back off because he knows he has to back off before like an injury potentially happens.
When they're doing their 2-a-days, though, I didn't see it written out. It's not just like doing like a Metcon and some stuff in the morning, then do a Metcon in the afternoon. It's mean like Metcon maybe in the afternoon, some endurance stuff, some strength stuff. It's all like scattered.
And it depends where in the season they would be. So like it still goes back to like, why are we doing this? So if it's, if they're doing some 2-a-days, which let's say, off season's totally done. We're starting to, it's a games athlete or a high level athlete, and we're starting to lift again. That 2-a-day, maybe just once a week or twice a week, but one of them may be just a pure strength lifting session. And the heart rate never gets up at all, no matter what it is. And then that second piece maybe gets like a Metcon or something else. So it doesn't necessarily have to be like Metcon. And I think when we talk about accessory work, I think that's where people sometimes go wrong, is they are hammering Metcon after Metcon after Metcon, and like if they are lifting, all of the lifting pieces are very high intensity, and they're trying to blend all that together, and then it's just not sustainable over time. Versus, like you said, some of these things are much slower, accessory, the stuff that's not killing them, like those high intensity pieces.
I also have like more of a specific question, and it's like actually has to do with the programming we have this week. But it applies for like a lot of the workouts that we may see like once a week, once every other week or so. Is when they're like a short little workout. Sometimes they're blended with some strength, sometimes they're not. So we have Annie. I think tomorrow we have Annie, and I'm like, okay. I mean, I like it. I mean, I want to work on my dubs and stuff like that, but it's like I feel like after doing Annie, there's still something I want to do. Like, what's your take on something like that with a workout that you feel like they'll like? I want something more.
Yeah, like a workout that you could definitely like go through and be like, I'm not even like hurt at all. And I mean hurt in the sense of like that workout hurt, not like physically.
Today was a good example too of just the running and sit-ups is all it was. I'm like, I did some snatch cycle stuff.
When you have workouts like that, I think a piece, there's two directions I want to go in here. One of them is like, what is your actual intensity in that workout, right? So looking at the workout you told me that you guys had today, I can go out, I can run the 400 meter, right? And I basically need to get the 400 meter done in 2 minutes because that was on the clock. So I can run this, 150, 400 meter, which may not be, a bad pace for a lot of people. And then I'm going to do sit-ups. I'm going to do max sit-ups, and maybe sit-ups are really easy. You can only really go so fast on those. Versus if I go, okay, Justin, we're doing this scheme, but all of your 400s need to be sub 130, right? And then you're virtually sprinting a 400, or like I give each person this like running number. That workout suddenly gets way worse, right? So like the intensity of how you're actually moving through it, are you moving to be like sustainable through the workout, or are you moving to like turn it more into like this really high intensity interval piece? That can make it way tougher. In something like Annie's case, right, it's double unders and ab mat sit-ups. Maybe those are both two really, really easy movements for you. And the person's going to go unbroken double unders without really a thing because they're used to doing sets of 100 or 150. And then maybe, 50 ab mat sit-ups really ain't a thing either. Then you can start to look at, okay, it's still okay to modify, right? And we always think of modifying as like modifying down, but modifying and scaling can be also scaling up as well. So you could do something to make Annie more complex. So maybe you say, I'm going to do Annie with single under crossovers today. Or I'm going to do, I don't want to put, don't go do this, but maybe I do Annie GHD sit-ups. That would be for a very, very specific person that has a pretty good volume of GHDs in every single week. If you do that and you haven't been doing that, you're not coming back for a while. It's not going to be good. That's why I say, like, I wouldn't go just do that. But it could be like any GHD sit up, but you're not doing 50, 40, 30, 20, 10. Maybe it's you're doing, I don't know if I'm going to get these numbers right. It's 25, 20, 15, 10, 5. Like, so you're reducing volume. So think of like sometimes scaling as like we can go up as well. I always like to take the approach of like, can I just go faster on this and make it more intense from a speed perspective before I go to that, like, can I turn the intensity up on scaling there? Because if you could just go faster, I would rather the athletes do that because we're applying more intensity that way versus scaling up first. Same reason why Fran is still devastating for an elite athlete. Like, it's an easy workout for them, but they're trying to go under 2 minutes. It's the speed of it is why it's so impactful.
So like Fran, I get, but the thing like with Annie, is because the double unders is one of these things that not everyone is so smooth and proficient with it that you just can't knock out maybe 50 unbroken. You're just going to get stuck, and that getting stuck for me, like, it's not that I'm catching my breath, but it makes it less intense.
It's dropping your intensity.
Fran, it is intense. Like, there's just no way around that, and that will kick my ass. And I'm not going to want to do anything after a Fran. But like the Annie was the example. Like, I'm like,
so.
But I guess the scaling up is a good option.
I did once an Annie that really killed me. It was in a competition and they prescribed Annie, and what they did was like, okay, for like to check that you're doing it right, they put 2 dumbbells for your feet and you had to touch behind your head and in your dumbbells. The dumbbells help you to do the sit-ups. So you are doing multiple sit-ups faster. And when you were faster, you were more intense, and it was really killing because you got more intensity on those. So there are ways to put more, make it harder.
Another way too is like you could make it a strict sit-up. So like, I don't know if you've ever done butterfly sit-ups where you don't use your arms. And I tell people, hold your shirt because it keeps their hands on them, and that gets substantially harder too. I think from the perspective of like Annie itself, if someone doesn't have just these easy double unders, then like, and they are going to struggle and they know they're going to trip up, then it really actually becomes like a skill workout. Like, you're kind of having a skill session, and that's okay too to have, like, allowing there to be like through your week, some days where you are just hammering it, and then you have something like Annie and it's going to trip you up and it becomes the skill session. Like, in a way, it kind of becomes like, I don't want to call it a rest day because it's not, but it becomes a day that's just beating you up less, and it kind of gives you wiggle room for tomorrow and the back half of the week. So
there's something else that I wanted to add.
Go ahead, Jose.
Annie was not the one who was prescribed for tomorrow, but we were in a phone call with the coaches, and we were saying, hey, I was saying it's going to be difficult to cover all the classes. Like Monday class, I don't know if you remember, it was like 23 minutes workout, and also find your max of bench press, which people get carry on. You get like 15 minutes doing bench press and then another 23 minutes of the workout explaining what. It was a long workout for Thursday, and we got max bench press on Monday, max back squat on Tuesday, and Thursday is going to be deadlifts, which is going to be, people is going to be carried away. And we were saying that CNS will be fried by Thursday. So
Annie's like it's intended to give a break, basically.
Yeah. And it was just like, hey, something easy just to sweat, not really pushing them.
That really is a really good point, because like I do that in my programming too, where I'll have a day and you kind of look at it and it's like not nearly as bad as the other days. And it's just because like I know what's coming and it's kind of like an intentful, like, I'm going to give you the day to not crush yourself because, Friday is going to be rough type feel. Just like, how you look at the open, like you don't ever want to do something too crazy on Wednesday and Thursday, because Friday night you're going to be going super hard. To that point too, something I like to do. This is like unrelated to these articles. Is sometimes I like to like pick days at random of like, okay, today I'm gonna approach it like I'm doing the open, and it's like I'm putting my blood, sweat, and tears and everything I have into this WOD today. And then the other days, like, yes, I'm working hard and I'm working at very high intensity, but I'm like operating at like an 80, 85%. Like I'm not totally sending it in. So sometimes I like to manipulate like how hard I'm personally going each day out of my own preservation. Like for me, doing that 1 day a week is plenty. Like I get really sore from it. It takes me a couple of days to recover versus, someone that's going to be younger. Maybe they can do that 2 or 3 times a week and be totally bad. But that's just a game I like to play in my head. I want to come back to Annie, Justin, because I know at the end of the day, like you're going to go in and do Annie and want to do some more. So once we talk accessory work, like let's go back and like play a little bit of fun. Like let's accessorize after Annie for you. Hobart also talked about when you do start to introduce more volume, that it gets harder to keep the variance moving. Which I totally agree with. You're starting to add multiple pieces. Now you're taking up things that are much easier to vary through the week. And you look and you go, damn, we did, 8 things on Monday and Tuesday. Like, what do I have left for Friday and Saturday? So sometimes things are going to become a little bit redundant, and that's okay, especially when you're, prepping for competition. Like there's going to be potentially multiple events that you're going to squat of some type or you're going to pull off the floor. So you have to be resilient and conditioned for that. But then at the same time, being aware that you still do need to be finding as much variance as possible. And when you look at, I think, programming, it's very easy to look at it and get caught up in like the new sexy thing, like wall walks is a great example. Like wall walks came up in the open, they became a mainstay in everyone's programming. Sandbags got introduced a little bit more at the games, and then all of a sudden you see sandbag squats and you see sandbag carries and holds and all these things, and they're fantastic. I'm not saying we shouldn't see them, they shouldn't be there, but when you're programming with such volume, you do need those obscure things in there to give yourself more of a variance. Versus like us at this level, there's a saying, they say, put the salt back in the center of the table. Like we need to like always be kind of asking ourselves that. And basically what that means is, are we getting too fancy or too sexy, or too far away from what is originally prescribed in our methodology? And do we need to bring it back to center? I think that's part of the reason the open gets so challenging, is because like the salt is put right into the center of the table. And guess what? You're doing burpees and dumbbell snatch. That's it. You're not doing burpees, dumbbell snatch, and 100-foot sandbag fish. Like sometimes adding those extra elements that can slow you down a little bit, even though you're working fast, like pulls away from just that raw intensity of a simple couplet or triplet. And looking back into like the fitness in 100 words, like Glassman says, program couplets and triplets, and they're short and fast for the majority of your stuff. So even when there is a lot of volume on and programming things like that, and things have to be different, look at how you're varying, and then look at can I pull that back to center and back to what our main goals are to make sure I'm not drifting too far away. That should kind of sound like something right now that's a fad. I don't want to call it a fad. It might be a fad. Who knows? But that's happening, I think, within the CrossFit space with the Hydrox, right? If you look at it, it's CrossFit. They just added, I don't want to say they added anything. They just took away, Olympic weightlifting and shorter, intense pieces, right? It can be for sure a great training tool, but it's a very like sports specific training tool. So as CrossFitters, we can step into that and do pretty well immediately because of our training. But if you go, I'm going to train this, and then you're only doing something like that, and then you want to step into a CrossFit competition, because remember, they have their own competition, you might get, smoked on a heavy event or a very, very short sprint workout. Like it's not training everything. So I'm not like shitting on Hydrox at all. Doesn't matter if someone's doing it. It's great. They're working out and it's functional movement, but they're taking that salt, and that salt shaker is getting away from the center of the table. and they're kind of leaving what that original, CrossFit methodology is. So I just wanted to use it as a good example of how that can happen, when looking at things. Are you guys familiar with the Hydrox? Have you seen this content stuff on Instagram? There's like programming you can buy now.
Barely, like I've seen a couple of like ads for, like you said, but I don't know enough about it. Like, so you're basically
like
saying it's similar to CrossFit, but they take out Olympic lifting and that's it?
It's like endurance
Yeah.
training,
monostructural plus like tons of wall balls,
light
sled,
weightlifting, if
sled
anything.
pull, ski, row, bike.
In their website, they say that it's anything that will hurt you, that it would be any like kettlebell falling on you or barbell falling on you or something like that.
Yeah, it's like
it out.
taking out the scary stuff of CrossFit. I would, that's a good way to put it also. But what I will say is, like, my gym sells it that I'm here, and they put a sample week up of programming, and I looked at it. It's CrossFit programming. You just don't see like the barbell. Like, if I really, really broke it down, like they were doing a bench press strength session, even though it's like very endurance based, there is stuff like that. And I would just literally say it's like, you're kind of pulling that like original intent away from like what Glassman said. Like, we're trying to be good at everything. I would say Hydrox is like getting a little more specific into endurance.
Do they have classes, like a CrossFit class, or how's it?
I'm sure there are gyms that are running classes, probably CrossFit gyms that are implementing it. I do know like there's a lot of CrossFit gyms that are implementing their programming and like selling like Hydrox programming on the side type stuff. Even on my application, like they teamed up with Fitter and offered me to be like a Hydrox like affiliate. So it's just their
the women who won the Open was a Hydrox athlete.
Yeah. Which I have a lot of questions about that and would like to know like real backstory, because I can see you doing well in the Open, but if she's going to be like a games competitor, like there needs to be a lot more of a well-rounded athlete in that than just saying like, oh, she did Hydrox. A really good example is Mal O'Brien did one and just absolutely dominated it. Even with some of these endurance athletes in that race, she still smoked it. And, she's just a CrossFitter. She just jumped into this little comp to have some fun. I think it's going to be, we'll see in time if that lingers around or not. I think people will eventually drift back just into classic CrossFit with it. The events are pretty cool though that they put on. But I just wanted, not talking bad on them, I just wanted to use that as an example of how that salt can get moved. And then the last like negative point of volume I just want to bring up is like, what is your time frame? So, if you're going to class and you're in a 60-minute block, that's going to be very, very hard to obviously put multiple pieces in. Like Jose was just saying, they tweaked programming based on time and based on how much was happening. So that's going to be a factor. And I think even if the person isn't taking class, like it's still a question of what's your time frame. Like, what do you have to comfortably be able to be at the gym? And it's not even just be at the gym. It's be at the gym, cooking food, doing some mobility on your own. That's going to be a really important question for volume as well, because you could want to be the CrossFit Games athlete, but if you say I have 1 hour a day to train, you have to make the most out of that hour, and you have to work with something with intensity in that hour. Versus if you just go through motions, you're never going to have that speed or load when it comes to intensity, and it's probably not going to be super beneficial. So just the consideration to always have there. Any questions on like some of the cons? I don't want to say cons, but just like things to be careful with intensity. You got something?
I'm still trying to find my own like fine line of what's
where you
too
like
much,
to be,
what's too little. Like I've pulled back a lot from where I was last year. Like I made it the intention last year to be like, I want to train like a professional CrossFit athlete. I'm going to put a lot of hours in. I was mimicking schedules that I saw from the big dogs out there, just to try to get like my level of strength and endurance as high as I can. And then this year I was going to take this step back a little bit and put more time into handstands, mobility, skill work.
Skill.
So that's kind
So
of
I
where I'm
think
now. And what I was going to kind of like pull back on is take a lot of the accessory stuff out and really just emphasize the mobility piece, the handstand piece, and skill piece.
have
Maybe just do a
like
couple days a week of accessory stuff.
a very focused intent. So I think that brings up like the next point I even want to make is like when you there was a part in that article and Hobart was saying like in the off season he goes to just taking class, and a lot of the years that he did that he had all these PRs happen. And I don't think it's because he got necessarily substantially fitter just taking class and doing games training, but I do think what happened was like he had more time to recover. And because he had more time to recover, he started feeling better. And like you really break it down, your gains come in your recovery. Like when you work out, you're just technically tearing things down, and it's in the rebuild that we get fitter. So I think finding the line of like enough recovery to where you're having these gains is going to be a really important thing, and it's going to vary individual to individual. And then when it does come to adding volume, you have this very specific what I want to work on and why. I think that's one very important. And then also doing it with a gradual ramp up too. Because if we go from just like going to CrossFit, taking class, and then we learn about this thing called the CrossFit Games, and we're like, I want to do mayhem or I want to do proven, you just went from exercising to what professionals do, right? And that gap is too big. So it's like you may want to just do, like you're saying, a day or two that I do accessory, and you just slowly start to build and block. And then maybe eventually when you're getting closer to your event, that's your why, you add in a two a day a week, or eventually twice a week. So just like you could build running, like that's a very simple way to think of how we're going to add volume. Apply it to like what you're doing inside the gym as well. I do think experimenting and doing what you're doing and trying to find like the right amount is good. I think you just have to look at that and go, when I think this is the right amount, am I still applying my intensity when it comes to like the GPP? So putting the salt shaker back in the middle of the table, my metcons, my main heavy lifts, am I still applying myself very well there? The answer is yes. And I have some of the successful work and volume going on, great. But if it's like I'm kind of sandbagging this metcon a little bit, and deep down inside I know it, or I'm like backing off my back squat sets a little bit because I know I got more coming, you have to really ask yourself that. Like for me personally, I know if I have something heavy I have to lift after my back squats, I'm going to sandbag a couple sets. And it's like, I know that about me. So it's going to be more beneficial for me to just max out my back squat sets and then be done for the day. So finding where you are is really important. And that's me. That's not anyone else on this call,
I have a question about recovery too. So I'll use myself as an analogy. If I have one off day, and that off day, it can almost feel like it's an active recovery because I'm teaching like a bunch that day. I'm teaching like
You're
3 or
still
4
very
classes.
on your feet, moving around.
So I'm on my feet. I'm doing some like basic demoing, light stretching, but this would apply for a coach as well. Maybe your off day, you're coaching to 3 classes, whatever. Like, can that be an off day, or do you feel like that doesn't count? Like, should you take another off day?
I think that really like also comes down to the individual and like looking at the total package of what's happening, right? So even if it's like not just a coach, like if it's Elise in her off day, she went into work early and she had boys rugby into girls basketball and she got home at 10 p.m. Like I wouldn't say like, oh, Elise is really rested that day. Like she's probably just as tired, if not more, going into the next training day. So I think you have to look at like everything that's happening. Like, is the person sleeping well? How much are they sleeping? How is the nutrition? How are they eating? Do they have all these other outside stressors in life? Like for me, like I can relate to like your statement, and like I had a day where I wouldn't work out, but I would also put 8 hours of coaching. And I get home and I am just absolutely like my brain ain't even working. Like I can't even figure out how to turn the TV on practically. So like would I consider that a recovery day? When when you word it like that, then you're kind of like, not really, like you're smoking when you got home. So like when it comes to situations like that, that having 2 rest days a week, I think is important. I think that's like, if anybody asks me, what do you recommend? I would say 2. But again, each person is different. Somebody that just gets on the bike and rides for an hour on their rest day, they may feel totally rejuvenated and great the next day. So it really just depends on where they are and like what you're feeling. And I think the biggest thing, being very honest with you. Because for me, like, I'm going to tell you, I'm not burned out. I'm not burned out. I'm not burned out until I'm at the point where like the Titanic is sank and I am done. And when I'm done, I'm done. I'm pulling out of everything. So it's like, and that's like me not being honest with how I'm actually feeling on a day to day as well. I can see it in my training too. Like I know my pattern now. It took me 13 years, but I know when I'm starting to start that slippery slope down and I have to pull back.
And usually the honesty shows up in your Metcons, because like for me, like those Saturday morning classes, like I'm mailing that class in. I'm just like, I'm just here to sweat, guys.
You know, and like you can look at me with my open, like I pretty much nailed most of the open in with it. Like I had no willingness to really hurt like everyone else in that. And like that's like I have to look at that and go, are you that unfit? And the answer is no. But like, where are you like mentally in this right now? And the answer was like, I just don't want to be in that position. So being honest with yourself, I think, is very important, and looking at some of those things that are happening to help like guide yourself. And that's, you know, part of the reason that they push training journals so heavily. It's not just logging your back squat score, but like when they say put notes in of how you felt today, like if you really wanted to keep a gauge on that, like it's not just your performance metrics, it's like where are you as well and how are you feeling, and you can look back and go, wow, the past 5 weeks I've written down that the barbell felt heavy and I wasn't into it today, and then you go, well, that's a pattern. Like it wasn't, I feel great, and there's one day that's off. So those things can be, you know, good track records as well. To do that. That's why I literally like books, like stuff I can write in, because it's easier to jot those things down than like when I put something in Wodify. It's harder to look back, in my opinion, on something like Wodify. But I'm also not the person that's like the most techie in the world either. I'd rather just open a notebook and be able to read it. So whatever works for each person is going to be different too. With all of this conversation, I think there was the most important line was in the end. And it said the magic's in the movement and the atmosphere. And then the Fred Glassman quote, that men are willing to die for points. I think you have to look at that and go, what are they talking? They're talking about training with people, enjoying it, right? The atmosphere, having fun, enjoying the process. And then like when I am working out next to you guys and we're all doing the same workout in the end, each of you are going to make me go a little faster and I'm going to make each of you go a little faster. So now it's also helping us apply intensity. And by that happening, that men are willing to die for points. Like I want to win the leaderboard today in class. That's helping me get fitter. So looking at the atmosphere and like, are you enjoying that? Are you with people you enjoy to be around, to work out with? I think can be one of the most important parts to all those. And it's the same reason if someone wants to like do my programming and hire me, I'm like, you take class as much as you want. And it has nothing to do with whose programming is better. But I know if someone takes class, that's going to help them push, especially on days that they don't really want to push. We know how our friends are. They're going to put the extra plate on the barbell even though we don't want to. We know that we can. So I think that's a really, really important part to think about and apply in situations like these as well. Maliello said, it's not what you do, it's who you do it with. It goes to show if you're doing well-programmed CrossFit methodology and you're with your friends, it's probably going to go well. So just always consider that for yourself, for your clients. Any questions on that before we kind of run through the misfit guide? Main takeaway for you potential test takers: intensity is not going to trump volume. Doing more is not always better. And if you're doing more without coaching and mechanics, you're probably being detrimental to yourself. So like those are your main points. The Misfit guide, I thought this was great because they had everything categorized and like broken down to the way, like almost in a way of importance. So they just said, with our accessory work, they'll focus on upper body, lower body, like midline, core work. And then they had like tiers of the accessory. And I think that was like the really important part to me. They had their primary accessory. That was like, I think they had 6 sets of 10, but I would call it, low to moderate reps, heavy loads. They just don't want you to fail. So you're not maxing anything out, but it's a challenging set. If it was a carry or a hold, it was somewhere between 30 and 90 seconds. 30 would mean it was too heavy. Less than 30, over 90 seconds would mean it was too light. So something challenging that you're probably not going to enjoy, but you're not going to fail. And then they have the secondary accessory points. Those are the higher reps. They're light to moderate. I would call that like the blood flow sets. So like when we start to talk about facilitating recovery and getting a lot of blood flow into an area, like that's what those secondary accessories are going to be like, are going to be for. Helping out with some localized stamina, stuff like that. And then they had their mobility, which Justin, you brought up mobility and working on that stuff, and stability. Those are going to be slow, very, very deliberate, tempo work. I don't remember if they said it in the Misfit thing or it was another place I read it, but they wrote basically if you are going to be applying the accessory to like be very intentful and make sure you're focusing on the why of what you're doing. Don't just do accessory work and go through the motions, which I 100% agree with. Like we talked about, Justin, you and pull-ups the other day, taking a moment and being very intentful on like your positioning when you're doing a chest election for the sake of practice. So having those thoughts and focal points, I think are very, very crucial and very important. And I know at least like you could probably double down on that all day with some of the rehab things you give your athletes. Like if you're bullshitting it, it's probably not going to help you. If you're being very focused, that's when the magic's going to happen. So I think no matter what, or if you're doing skill, if you're doing mobility, if you're doing stability, if you're just trying to get stronger, like really being like, what's my why behind this and what do I need to be focusing on? And then the last thing, they just said, don't overthink it. So I think if you want to get strong, lift weights. If you want to get mobile, take your joints through ranges of motion. If you want to get a strong core or more stable shoulders, resist movement. So I think keeping things simple and like going back to just those key points. I don't know that it matters like how fancy you get with it. Keep it simple. Just focus on like why you're doing it, basically. I see things sometimes in my experience of programming people that are super cool. Like it'll be this like banded pin press and it's like this whole setup the athlete has to do, and I'm like, yeah, that's awesome. But then like you get into the gym and you have to do all the setup or you need all this different equipment. Like you're, I think, one, less likely to do those things. And then two, if you're prescribing it for somebody, they're less likely to do it too. They're probably thinking about skipping over, and especially if it's on the back half of the workout. So I think sometimes keeping things just very simple and not getting too fancy can be a major driver in adaptation because of the likelihood that someone is going to do it and is going to focus on it. Does that make sense? They didn't say that here, but that's in my own personal experience with myself working out and programming working out. Even to the point where like when I was at Riptide, like there was stuff in the shed and I was like, I don't want to get out of the shed. It's like not even that big of a deal to get something out of the shed, but it's like the truth. So just having those thoughts around it too.
Can you give an example of the I guess it's primary or secondary, doesn't make a difference, a hold and a carry? Are we talking about like a farmer's carry? Like
yeah, like hold carry could be farmer's carry, single arm farmer's carry, like a suitcase, could be a front rack, overhead, like a bear hug, L sit, plank, hollow hold, and like
overhead bamboo.
Yeah, overhead.
So essentially, the hold is you're standing still, and the
Yeah, you
carry
could
you're
be just
moving.
standing in place. So maybe my accessory work for you is, ooh, post any accessory work here. Maybe my post any accessory work for you
Yes,
is
love it.
a sandbag hold, just hold. You pick it up, you hold it at your chest, you're just staying in place, and you're gonna do a 45-second hold in place. Right? You're not moving. Or it could be a carry, could be that same thing, but you're moving distance actually. Um, it could be a front rack hold, just off the rack and hold, and that's going to accessorize like this, all the sit-ups. Right now we're looking when it comes to holds and carries, we're looking at like what's the core's
It just
actual job,
it just
not to
came to
move.
my mind. Sorry, I just came to my mind. For example, tomorrow we have any, but before you have 15 minutes to find one max rep for deadlift. And I could put it in the middle of the activation of the core, actually to hold like overhead holds and just to show me the activate and walking overhead
Like
kettlebells.
like in the
What?
warm up, you mean to get things
Yeah,
like woke up? Yeah, for
yeah.
sure. Um, and like I was saying earlier, I do like you don't always have to think of some of these things as being, secondary. Like it can come before the workout. And it just depends, I think, to what degree are you doing it, for the workout. Like that's a
And I
great
think
example. Or like
a
glute
good
bridges. How many times do you glute bridges for a warm up, or you get real heavy afterward in their accessory? What were you gonna say this?
I was gonna say I think a good carry for Annie pre would be a waiter's carry. I think you'll get more as opposed to overhead. You'll get more of the anterior delt, which gets involved in the actual dubs.
Yeah, and you have that front loaded nature too. So like there is going to be blood flow that's happening like into the core. And the overhead, like the core's got to be more silent, so it's going to activate and that's going to turn on as well. Um,
So actually, I would like you to kind of go through the scenario like you're doing right now. You gave me a primary carry. We've got a primary hold. Um, I guess we'll use the deadlift that's in part of the workout as like the primary lift. Is that how like you would view that, or would you do a second kind of primary lift?
Deadlift is like, so when they say primary here, they mean like they're referring to primary accessory work. So
Oh,
like
okay,
the deadlift is the workout, right? And then
gotcha.
Annie is the workout. So like let's say my primary accessory movement coming
The
off that deadlift
posterior.
is, yeah, maybe it's like a front rack lunge. Like I want to challenge the core with that front hold position, and then lunges I'm gonna still fire up the glutes and like hit the low body, right? And that may be my 6 sets of 10, or it could be, I'm a big fan of going single leg stuff. So it could be like my primary is gonna be single leg RDLs,
Yeah.
or a staggered stance good morning. Like that could be my primary. And then my secondary may be sets of 20 to 30 banded glute bridges or banded good mornings, to where you're doing these big sets and you're doing it quickly. So there's a lot of blood flow happening there. And I think they even said in that little breakdown that the secondary movements are the intensity is going to be applied by you, not load. So what's that mean? The faster I'm doing those good mornings, there's my intensity for that piece. It's not the how hard the band is on the good one. So like you got deadlifts tomorrow. I would take a look at like what is happening on Friday, like what heavy lifts do you have there? But like your accessory work coming out of that deadlift any workout could be. I personally think I like the front rack lunge. It
Hmm.
incorporates the whole leg, but like usually I really hit the glutes pretty hard for myself. I would be just a little hesitant on getting heavy with another hinge because you already got heavy with a hinge. So I would still want to go low body, but not like double down and go too much volume on that movement function. And then
Hip
you could get,
thrusters,
yeah, you
hamstring
could get
curls.
exactly all those. And like a little lighter, a little faster for a secondary. But I would also maybe want to throw in like a core hold So maybe a sandbag hug, you could do that like directly post lunge set, or if you wanted to throw in an L-sit hold or a hollow hold, something that was going to make the core be very static along with the lunge or along with that like secondary one.
So would you superset any of these, or how would you like put these together, like with the carries, the hold, in the lift?
If you can I would say yes to superset. If you can superset them while like, so if it was going to be, let's say you were going to do 5 sets of 10 front rack lunges, if you were able to go, okay, I'm going to do a 100-foot sandbag carry and still go unbroken at like, a moderate to moderate heavy load, then yeah. But if it was going to be, I'm going to end up going much lighter on the lunges and much lighter on the carry because I am going back to back, then I would not superset them.
Okay.
So I think if they're going to mess with each other, no. If you're able to carry out your intent and your why and superset them, then even better. Yeah, we're CrossFitters, and the more work tasks we do in less time, that means we have more power, and that's what we want. So I would let that dictate whether you superset things or not. Or maybe it's a time thing. Maybe you got 10 minutes. You're like, I'm going to do, an imam, and I'm going to alternate him because I only have 10 minutes. So like, you have to take that into consideration too. But yeah, any kind of hold tomorrow after Annie, and then any kind of low body strength work would be great because you have those deadlifts prior. But I would definitely want, if any of my core work, I want it to be static because Annie has so much dynamic set up. I want to make sure I do something different. I don't want to go back to like a dynamic. That makes sense?
Or you can even do like posterior chains like Superman's too. Superman holds.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Just work the opposite.
Yeah, GHD like back extensions or hip extensions would be great. I think after that,
would that be
especially
considered a hold?
You could make it a hold. So you can be dynamic and move, or you can do like a Superman hold, just like a prone on the GHD. I love those. I'm a big fan of those.
They hurt a lot.
Hard.
Yes.
Yeah. You could straight do a superset of that, a GHD plank hold into a GHD like prone face down hold, and just go boom for time, boom for time. Really tough but great. I love to program this for like people who use me for powerlifting because they need to be static in all of their lifts. But for CrossFitters, definitely just as good. That's a really good one, Elise. Any other questions or thoughts like on that stuff?
Oh, you okay?
I'm gonna give it a try. I want to program in some more of these holds and carries to take out some of the other stuff that I was doing.
So sorry, Nate, go ahead.
You go and then I'll go. I won't forget my point.
I was gonna say, because you said you're working on your handstand holds too. Like the overhead carries are just gonna help enhance that too. I don't know, like your handstands look really, really pretty. So I don't know if you're just trying to work on like walking or whatever, but just doing the static overhead, double kettlebell overhead hold is gonna help a lot with those.
The more stability you have, the easier that stuff's gonna get. And I think in like your case, Justin, you're really good at that stuff. Like it potentially would become the laughable movement that you get. That's like a rest for you compared to the rest of us dying. So that and when we talk about like core work, the more holds you do, the stronger that whole structure is going to get, right? The better it's going to get. Which, to Elise's point, is going to translate into a lot of your gymnastics. But then also, like when we talk about like cleaning and things like that, that's going to boost the confidence and feel there as well. So like that translation is literally going to bleed into everything that we do as CrossFitters. I think the holds are probably like the least fun thing, but I think they should be utilized 100 times more than we are. And if you look at, going back to what I said earlier, put the salt shaker back in the table, you look at Fitness in 100 Words, by Greg Glassman, holds are a part of that. That is in that sentence. So if you ever need like a very fast roadmap, go look at that Fitness in 100 Words, and it'll remind you of what we should be doing on day to day.
And to both your point, Nathan, and Elise's point, some of the accessory work that I do on days like on deadlift days will be walking lunges with kettlebell overhead So I'm
Perfect.
getting that stimulus I'm wanting in my shoulders, but I'm also getting the stimulus in my lower legs.
And then the only thing I would say with that, I love it. I think it's great. Just vary it. Don't let that be your every time
Front
go-to.
rack sometimes double.
Yeah, switch it up. Dumbbell, kettlebell, barbell, sandbag. Like find different implements.
Wait.
Don't always go symmetrical on the loads. Maybe you go a much heavier front rack or a very heavy farmer with a much lighter overhead, or maybe you just do one dumbbell. So now we're really getting into the erectors and obliques, having to stabilize that way too. I mean, let yourself be a kid with creativity when it comes to that stuff. The only thing I'll say is don't do everything on like just your right side. You know, make sure you're balancing out. And if you do have a weaker side, let yourself have an extra set on that side. Like there's nothing wrong with that. I know my left leg is not nearly as strong as my right. I always do an extra set of like box step ups on that leg. So let yourself have that stuff too. Yeah, program, write something up for yourself. Like use it as practice, and then if you want, send it in the group, and we'll throw ideas at you or whatever.
Oh yeah, I'll send you
That's a good idea.
something for my Friday workout.
Perfect. Yeah, let us know what the Friday is.
Yeah.
And then like what you're like planning, how you're planning to accessorize it. That way we have
Yeah.
like context. Sweet. I like that. And then other than that, actually I'll see you guys tomorrow. Today's Wednesday. Because we are off on our schedule. Send any videos you guys have. I've got a few from last week that you guys sent. I think I have enough, but just in case. So if you got anything, send it on over. And
I got some more to send you too.
Perfect. I'm gonna try to take some videos.
You're
today.
24.3.
Oh yeah, that's right. That's I was gonna say. I know Jose sent me something. It's me. I forgot it's me. Well, I'll put that one where I do the weird pause, because that can definitely be some conversation.
Well, even your
Not
chest
my-
to bar, like all the different kind of like grips and stuff you were doing was also an interesting point. to
Not my finest moment. We'll talk. We'll get in on that. I don't know, Jose. Did you send me a chest to bar video, or is it just a thruster?
It's both. It's
Okay,
farther.
perfect.
Yeah.
We'll look at
Yeah,
both.
you make your feet way far, and then your hip. You try to go, and then you go. So it's kind of different.
That was my dying chest to bar and the low bar. I know what you're talking about. We'll look at both and let that be some good combo too. I won't hold back on myself, I promise. But I'll see you guys tomorrow at 12 then.